Friends, do you feel a bit out of sorts and upside down this past week or so? For me, it's kind of like I'm having to relearn how to do every single thing that I'm doing, all the while maintaining a safe social distance. Stay 4 to 6 feet away from the screen, please. Now, luckily for us at St. Michael's, we're in perhaps better shape than some other congregations. This isn't our first time trying to do worship online or through live streaming. It's not our first rodeo. We stream every Sunday at 10:30, and yet somehow this week seems harder, different, because we are separated physically from one another, worried about families and friends. There is certainly concern. There is concern about the economy. We've crossed the Rubicon of the Dow being below 20,000. What does it mean for business to be suspended for I don't know how long? What does it mean that there's no large public gatherings for several weeks and the restaurants are closed? I mean, the Dow's down, but it's coming back, right? Just tell me it'll come back. With business as usual suspended, what's going to happen to the people who can't go to work remotely? When is this going to end? And how will we and the world be different? The other question that I can't help but ask myself is, who's at fault for this? Who made this happen? Who should we blame? Who sinned? That's the question the gospel reading is. And then we start the blame game. I think it was President Xi. Yes, that's what happened. The Chinese government didn't tell us the truth, and now look where we are. And I've heard other people say, no, it was President Trump and his lousy response to this. He didn't do a good job. And yet others say, President Trump did a great job. How dare you question him and his leadership? No, he's doing a terrific job. Yes, it's the people who aren't social distancing themselves severely enough. They're the ones that we ought to blame. But in the midst of all that blame, fear begins to set in and it grips us. And fear divides us. You know who the author of fear is, don't you? That's right. Could it maybe be Satan? Fear does not come from God. It is not a gospel value. But still, like the disciples, we want to know who sinned to cause all of this and who to blame. Jesus says that we shouldn't be about this blame game. We don't need to look at President Xi or President Trump or the World Health Organization or the CDC or the people going out and partying still and traveling to the beach. As tempting as it is to find someone, something, anyone to blame, Jesus tries to call us to a better way. Now, the religious leaders are also all about asking who sinned, this man or someone else. But Jesus said, we're not worrying about who sinned to make this happen. This has happened so that God's works might be revealed. And when Jesus is talking about God's works, it's not like Jesus is going to pick up a shovel and start digging a ditch on your behalf. No, the word he's using is ergon in Greek, and he's talking about the covenantal life and relationship that God is calling us into. The work of salvation that God is doing every single week. The work he did with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses. And the work he is completing and perfecting in the sending of his Son Jesus into the world. Jesus comes to do that work, that ergon, to destroy the power of sin and death, to destroy our fear. And it is into this covenantal fear-destroying work that we ourselves is called. Psalm 23 reminds us that the Lord is our shepherd. He's our guardian, our protector, our watcher, our comforter. And he looks after us so that we need not be afraid. Jesus looks after us. We need not be afraid. This is the moment for the church to come together and to be the church. So let me tell you a story about the church. It's from the 3rd century A.D. The Roman emperor is Julian, not Julius Caesar, but Julian nonetheless. And he is not a fan of these people he calls the Galileans. Now, he called the Christians that because they followed the man from Galilee. The plague of Cyprian is happening. It's called that because of a bishop named Cyprian who wrote about the plague, and it's the reason we know about it today. Cyprian recounts the history of the plague. It is going nuts and running wild. The disease probably somehow related to Ebola, and we see this plague of Cyprian just knocking people in cities and towns off left and right, and it's probably this plague that causes the Roman Empire to really start kind of crumbling down in the 3rd century. The economy was weak and people were literally dying in the streets. Now all the Romans, they fled, they ran away. They took their money and toys and they didn't go home, but they went somewhere else because they were too afraid of getting sick, of getting infected. And so they left behind the sick and the hungry, the poor and the weak to die. But the Galileans, Jesus' people, well, they refused to give themselves over to that fear and to leave those people behind. The Galileans stayed. The Galileans looked after the sick, the hungry, and the poor, and the weak. Even as Emperor Julian complained bitterly about them, they quietly went about the work of being Jesus' body in the world, even in the midst of fear. Amazingly, or perhaps not so amazingly, the church experienced explosive growth during the plague of Cyprian and the whole 3rd century. Because as people saw that the Galileans, these Jesus followers, cared enough not to abandon their own or to abandon others, they said there's something different about the way these people live, even when things are scary. We want to be a part of that. Now, we are making plans at St. Michael's for what worship's going to look like over the coming weeks and what changes we may experience. I don't know the full story of it yet, and I don't know when we're going to be gathering back together in person. Rest assured there will be a big party when we do. It will be a mighty celebration. But I also know that we are working on plans for how we can care for one another and for others. We are looking at ways that we can still find and bring food for the students at Burton Pack who wouldn't have food otherwise to eat. I ask that you would be generous in doing that. We are looking on ways to create phone lists and online gatherings so we can look after one another and pray for one another and to bear one another up in this fear. I've seen preschool parents agree to watch other people's kids so that they can go to school. And some of our teachers are going to people's houses and watching their kids so that they can go to work. We will get through this together as the people of Jesus Christ because we are the Galileans and we look after the sick and the hungry and the poor. Be sure to keep your eyes peeled and to listen and look for ways that you might help and reach out. Call your neighbor who's old. Ask them if you can bring them food, if you can go to the grocery store for them. Look after one another and be gentle to one another. More will be coming in the days and perhaps weeks to follow. But together we will get through this because we are those Galileans, the Church of Christ, and we're not afraid. Amen.